21st Century Radio with your host, Dr. Zoe Hieronymus.
It's all about soul. It's all about faith and a deeper devotion. It's all about soul. 'Cause under love is a stronger emotion.
Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Zoe Hieronymus. Laura Courtner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington runs our board. I don't recall ever saying of a guest before that not only did they grow up in Brighton Beach, they grew up to have a beautiful body of work and have embodied the stories and wisdom that they write and speak about. Deena Metzger is indeed a wise woman whom for decades has guided others in their own pursuits, artistically, spiritually, healing-wise, finding one's true voice. She encouraged others to live bravely at the edge, to do things one might think they can't or shouldn't, and how to become our authentic selves. Deena Metzger has spent a lifetime helping to create a bountiful well for thousands of people. Her work has taken various forms as poetry, plays, novels, lectures, ceremonies, gatherings, mentoring, cross-cultural weavings, healing ceremony, professional teaching, and being an ambassador for nature. But one notes a thread through all her various collaborations worldwide and in America. She, like other path showers, understands that each one of us and the world are one. Each of us who heals helps heal the world in our journey to wholeness. Each one of us is uniquely designed to contribute to a planet so desperate for the right kind of attention and intention. As is said of Deena Metzger's work as a writer, quote, "From the beginning, her writing has concerned itself with the interplay between the human and the natural world, and the hope that the ways of original creation might be restored, so all beings might have a viable future," unquote. How beautifully said, Deena. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Zoe, for that incredible introduction.
Well, I'm blown away by your work. You know, we have a mutual friend, Gay Bradshaw, who said, "Oh, Zoe, you must talk to Deena." And I don't know how I missed your extraordinary body of work all these decades. I feel like, what, am I late to class or something here?
Well, in some ways, I think I'm an underground writer. And part of that is that I have stayed away from the circuits and from different kinds of commercialization of work because, well, I suppose because I'm committed to the work.
Yeah. Yeah. How did I love Brighton Beach, and Woody Allen's films have sort of memorialized it in my heart as to being this extraordinary place. But how did Brighton Beach and your family shape your inner nature?
Well, I only lived in Brighton Beach till I was 3, and then we moved to a place called Seagate, which is at the tip end of Coney Island. So it really is that peninsula that raised me. And because it was a peninsula, it was surrounded by water. And so I could say in some ways that I was raised by the ocean because I heard those sounds and I knew the wind and weather. And I suppose what I would say is that for some reason, when I was about 7, from the time I was 7 or 8, I had the idea that a writer was someone who knew how to walk. And I wanted to be a writer, so I taught myself how to walk. How do you walk every day? How do you look at the neighborhood? How do you look at the streets? How do you listen to the wind? And so Brighton Beach didn't raise me so much as I think the natural world did.
Yeah.
But also in that time, real life existed in that area. It had a rawness and a vitality. It was not gentrified.
Yeah, it was real community of real people.
real people, real community. You walked, you knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
That made all the difference.
How fortunate. You know, when I read that about you, that you started walking at a young age, it reminded me of Cain Carroll's work on the 4 dignities in Taoism, that there are 4 ways to meditate, you know, standing, sitting, lying down, and walking, and that you were doing this very Taoist practice as a way to listen. It's
yes,
lovely.
And I have spent some time with Thich Nhat Hanh,
Uh-huh.
who also believes in walking meditation. You know, there's also a way in which walking is very important to theater people, because the words strophe and antistrophe from Greek theater refer to walking from one side of the stage to another. And there's something that happens in the mind through walking that is important.
I have found walking in the woods is one of the few ways that I feel completely embraced. That's the best word, I think.
Right.
And you know, I noticed because I had sort of like a late gamer's education, I've spent hours reading your poetry online. I've been all over the place.
Oh, my.
Reading your beautiful, I am just so enthralled with your poetry. But you also seem to be, like many of us, brave women, an edge walker. You know, I noticed you walk the edge where sky meets water, where the land meets sky, where community arises.
Absolutely.
And so talk to us about it, because the thing that strikes me that's so extraordinary to me is that you have this great valuing and use of solitude in your life, but you also spend so much time helping so many others.
Right.
How do you balance that?
With difficulty.
I'm glad to hear that. I thought I was one of the few that really struggled on this front.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you actually catch me about 48 hours after I decided that I was going to take off 7 months from maybe the first week in July through January.
Mm-hmm.
And much of that time will be in solitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I've spent a lot of my writing time seeking solitude, and love community at the same time. So is it a balance? I don't know if it's a balance. I think it's like having 2 balls in the air at the same time and trying to keep the velocity and the energy of it going.
Well, I'm awed by the energy you have. I know you just finished one of your big 19th year of these writers' conferences where you bring together people who really are very committed to writing as a way of gifting to the world by, you know, making themselves whole and finding ways to communicate. Language you write has become a challenge, and this is the way you said it. It's actually all over the internet as picture quotes. It says, you wrote, quote, "The world of public discourse, political, social, diplomatic, commercial, has so corrupted language that we are rightly more suspicious of the meaning of words than we are convinced of their veracity. Language has been turned on its head."
Well, you talk to people all the time. Don't you find the kind of people that you speak to are concerned about meaning? And a word that matters to me a great deal, which is truth, that things be true, not my truth, not my opinion, not my feelings, but that there is a truth and exactness about the nature of reality that a writer seeks and tries then to express as best as she or he can. And in this day, I hate to even say the words fake news, because it is such a horror that we would be bandying about the possibility that journalists upon whom we depend, let alone a president, would be creating falsehood, that we have a president who lies. that is, it's soul-destroying to think that.
No question about it. You know, Dean Radin recently made an extraordinary point in his new book on the history of magic and showing how it, there's a currency to it. And he said that the Supreme Court has engaged in black magic in the sense that they created a golem by naming the corporation as a person.
Right.
Oh, my God, what an insight. And I think that's Trump is a black magician. I mean, people say, oh, he's not an occultist. Well, he doesn't have to be. He's just plain devilish and does such destructive things to the country, to other countries, to individuals, to our trust in each other, to our love of our nation, and our nation once was so beloved.
Right. Well, we also have an unacknowledged history.
True.
And maybe that is what is emerging, that we are forced to look at ourselves.
Yeah.
And what I ask people to do when I work with them is I ask them to bear witness and to scrutinize all their assumptions and all the assumptions within which we live, and then to disentangle from the lies and the falsehoods and that which is about to destroy the world if we let it. I mean, all life is threatened.
And I like, by the way, I have to thank you for stating so. The thing I so respect about your use of language is the carefulness with which you have dedicated to its use. And one of the things you said is climate change is basically a code word for extinction.
Yes. Oh, well, I know where you read that. You read that in A Reign of Nightbirds, my latest novel.
Oh, my gosh. And I'm not finished the book, but I want to thank you for writing the book. I don't have to now.
Well, you have to write what you have to write.
Well, the notion.
You're not going to get away with it. No, not for a moment.
Why don't we talk about that for a moment, your new book? Because you have made it possible for those of us who have looked for the right language. And I do want to comment just for a moment back to language. I have found, Deena, in interviewing so many extraordinary men, women, and occasionally children over the last 30-plus years, is we often struggle to find a language to describe what it is we're making the effort to experience and become, like unity consciousness. How many times can we say unity consciousness and it still hold meaning?
I don't know what it means.
Right. Well, the way physicists and, spiritualists speak to it is that we're moving towards not only the understanding in our heart that all is connected, but that we are moving towards the experience of unitary consciousness, where what they say happened at the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people. Everybody was of one mind, felt the same thing that everybody else felt, heard the same thing that everybody else heard.
I don't believe it. I think that is our infatuation with ourselves. And if you read my writing, there really is a lament about mono-thinking, whether it's monopoly or monotheism. When I think of unity, I don't think of similarity. I think of relationship. And for me, the words that can guide me are the Lakota Sioux words, Metakyo Yasin, all my relations.
Yeah.
To recognize one relationship to everything else, and also to recognize that diversity is of the essence to our survival. So no eco niche will survive if it is not diverse. And as we go around and we destroy different species and we limit the number of beings that are on the planet, we are actually furthering our own demise.
Totally. I agree entirely. It's a beautiful way to express that you can have unity in diversity, out of the many one, e pluribus unum, on our own coat of arms. We'll be right back. Our guest is Deena Metzger. You can learn more about her extraordinary work at www.deena, D-E-E-N-A, Metzger, METZGER.net. That's www.deenametzger.net.
Hello, this is Dr. Gay Bradshaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Kerulos Center, www.kerulos.org, Kerulos.org. Our organization is dedicated to bringing dignity and freedom for all animals. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronymus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'd like to read a short poem by our guest this hour, Deena Metzger. Quote, "Suddenly the sky rains gulls, pelicans, pigeons, crows, ravens, hawks dart through our hands in patterns of flight and wind, the silver threads of elsewhere in their beaks. This is the weaving of invisible, shimmering worlds into a single fabric of mind. We call this the augury of the birds," unquote. I thought this was such a beautiful introduction, Deena, to your new book, Reign of Night Birds.
Oh. How beautiful that you chose that. And I think it speaks of, in part, what we were speaking about, the balance, the back and forth, the resonance between the one and the many.
Yeah.
Yeah, that single way of seeing, which depends upon all those particular birds existing.
And of course, birds are seen by cultures worldwide as messengers of spirit.
Right. Yes. Because they often are.
Yeah.
It's not an imaginative thing. It's that some people still know how to live in that relationship where a bird is just a bird, and also at the same time, in a moment, might also be a very specific messenger. And how do we learn to negotiate the ordinary, let's say, fourth world reality, and at the same time live in and respond to a spiritual reality?
And you talk about that so beautifully, about the fifth world, and maybe you can first describe for our audience who may not be familiar with the cultures that speak to the fifth world, what that is.
Well, there is a hope that we might change our minds and leave the violent and self-oriented, narcissistic, greedy culture that we're in for ways of being and thinking that have to do with relationship and recognizing the holiness of the earth, so earth-based, spirit-based ways of living that put us on a trajectory of restoration rather than the trajectory that we're on towards annihilation. And I think that in A Reign of Night Birds, the characters are very sensitive to the energies of the earth. Sandra Birdswell in particular, she can feel the earth in her body. She can feel the tremors. She can feel mining. She can feel the bombs falling wherever they are, as well as earthquake or whatever. And this sensitivity helps her begin to know the earth as mother. And she's a climatologist, so she is completely heartbroken about the earth because that's her field of study. And so she walks in this world where science gives her knowledge and her body gives her wisdom.
Oh, beautiful way to put it. I have to thank my body for quaking all the time then from the tremors of the earth. I mean, you described it. I felt like, oh, her name is Zoe.
There you go. Absolutely. Life. That's your name. So that's wonderful, Zoe, actually, when you hear your name said in that moment, if you can, I don't know if you can tune to it every time you're called, but sometimes you must.
I do. You know, people love to call me Zoe, which is the Greek for the spirit of life, and
right.
And Zoe is actually a derivative of Zohara, which is my Hebrew name, which means soul of light. So either way, I'm constantly reminded that I'm here to have a splendid time with spirit and soul, and I do my best. But so Sandra Birdwell has a sensitivity. She's one of the main characters in your new book, A Reign of Nightbirds, and then we go forward.
And she reconnects with the chair of her department in climatology, who was a mixed blood, native man, sensitive to what's happening in the earth, and carrying the two traditions not comfortably in his body. And the two of them form a really incredible relationship, because when you can open yourself up to really love someone, there are no longer barriers of any sort. And so the pain of the world, as well as the wonder of their relationship, is between them. She is the daughter of a country physician whose wife or whose partner died in childbirth. He's a really wonderful man. He's a fabulous old-fashioned doctor. It's a kind we wish could still exist. I think the kind of physician that most physicians would like to be, but corporate medicine prevents it. And he was, rather than go to the Vietnam War, he took alternate service, and so he was on the Four Corners Reservation, where he met a medicine person, a very young elder. And these four create an incredible conversation about the state of the world and possibility. And they feel, in each of their different ways, the grief that we need to know and begin to look toward what might be possible. How do we survive these times? And I think for me the theme of the book, as it began to emerge, was that the same mind that has led us to climate change is the mind that created genocide on the astonishing wisdom traditions of the first peoples on this continent, the Native American people.
It is true. This sense of entitlement, the same entitlement for war and rape and mutilation worldwide allows people to go clear-cut the rainforest in the same way, or kill the whales. And I think in your blog title, this notion of beauty and ruin, and this calling that we are each now charged with, to be honest about what is truly happening. As you pointed out, climate change is code for extinction, and we are in the sixth extinction, but you don't see many stories about the volume of species dying every year. 217,000.
Right.
Used to be 1 to 10 was the background rate. And so you use words, and to those listening who say, well, I'm not an author, but I like to write a journal. Let's talk about that, because you do such a beautiful job of showing anybody that writing our story is not just about telling story, but about making ourselves whole, so we find even lost parts of ourselves.
and that we look to see what our story is. Sometimes our story develops without our realizing it out of strange and extraordinary events, unexpected meetings. Any moment can be the central point from which a story emerges. So, for example, you were talking about birds earlier as spiritual messengers, and I could say to you, Zoe, I bet there was a time when you saw a bird at a particular time and you thought, oh, my God.
Yeah. Crows always show up if there are police around.
There you go.
Always when I drive on the highway.
There you go. So you have some kind of So then we could say, who is this woman to whom the crows come?
Old Lakota, last life. But I think they call it cultural appropriation, so I left it out of my book.
Well, but let's take it out of that. It's just you are a woman to whom the crows come. We don't need to put it into someone else's tradition because it comes to you.
Right.
And so then you begin to wonder about that.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? Why are they coming? And what is my connection? And how am I thinking about it? And a story begins to emerge that is different from the way we're taught to think about ourselves. So I could say to you, okay, Zoe, you asked me about Brighton Beach. Where did you go to school? And what degrees do you have? And, all of that sort of stuff. Or you could tell me about yourself in terms of crows.
Mm-hmm.
And they would both be true, but one would have a feeling of story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
those are beautiful questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I think actually now that you've said it, I just need to say this. In another life, and it wasn't the Lakota, it was another one, when I was also Native American and our tribe was massacred, my husband's name was Black Crow. I just realized that for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And this is what you just told me. You told me, by remembering that you carry the anguish of a massacre.
True.
And so now we're beginning to understand something about why you do the work you do and what you carry.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are things that you know in your heart, whether it's from this life or another life, there are things that you know and you are responsible to them. So now, if I may do this.
Please do.
The woman named Zoe, which means life, carries the anguish and history of massacre.
All true.
Right?
Yeah, I have to tell you a little addendum to that. Oh, no, go ahead. You finish your thought.
No, go.
I was going to say, for years, I had to have an RV because I go, within my Russian genetics, I'm always running from the Cossacks. So not only from the American soldiers, but the Cossacks, so it's interesting this, and then finally I actually donated it to the Karulos organization where, Gay Bradshaw is, and I felt that was finally, I had overcome that fear of escape, and that instead it's now a love of devoting to be present. And not planning on how are we going to escape.
Well, maybe, if I may
Please.
say so, it's because of where history has taken us, there isn't anywhere to go.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly true.
And so you gave it, in a sense, you gave it to the animals who are also endangered, right?
Totally.
Extinction. And so there's a gesture. But what you did was you listed what your mind, heart, soul knows about persecution and danger. And yet you've been given a name which I think has a mandate to it, which is to be for life.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what you know,
Mm-hmm.
to be for life. And that creates a very complex and interesting person.
Yeah, I mean, like you even found when you were diagnosed with breast cancer, it sent you down a journey that has resulted in so much clarity. You wrote, "Heal the life, and life will heal you."
Right. It was so many things came to me. I mean, my life changed, and I was working for a while at a place called the Center for the Healing Arts. It was the first center for ancillary approaches to cancer, and a man came to one of the groups that we were hosting, and he said, "Cancer is the answer," because he got cancer, and it was a kick in the ass, and he changed his life.
Mm-hmm.
And before he wasn't really living. And now he was really living. He examined every moment. Every moment was precious, and every moment was in relationship to what was good for him, what was good for others. Because for me, heal the life meant that healing could be contagious. If I lived a healing life, I want people to catch it from me.
Mm-hmm. And I think you just had this beautiful insight about the way things manifest in culture and in our persons, because you point to the reality that individual and personal healing leads to social change. Yes,
absolutely. It's like our own. In looking for our own healing, for me, in looking for our own healing, we have to look at what's healing for everyone. And so our fate and the community's fate are one. And so our fate and the human community and the non-human community and the earth, all of that has to be considered. So when I think of gestures and things that I want to do, I want one gesture that moves all the way through from my own life through all life.
You know, it's such an interesting perspective. I shared that desire, to look for the little magical stone that you drop in the pond. Uh-huh. And I wrote this years ago. I wrote a piece called High Tide Prayer. I was by the water for a long time where I did my writing, and I realized that when the tide is highest, it means Mother is closest to us, and because anything we put in water is magnified, I wrote a thing about I love you. If we all just give the message to the body of water, I love you, it carries it back out into the ocean and helps Gaia's whole fabric stay intact. And some people got it, and other people thought that I was being naive and a little, poetic. And I said, no, it's literal. It's not poetry. I mean, it might be poetic, but it's literal.
Right. See, that's so wonderful. It might be poetic, but that doesn't mean it isn't true.
Right, right.
I mean, what kind of crazy idea is that, right?
Spoken like a true poet. We're going to take our last break of the hour. I wish we didn't have any breaks, but we do. Deena Metzger is our guest. I encourage you all, if you haven't read her work, you don't know about her life, follow up at www.deena, D-E-N-A, Metzger, METZGER.net. And her latest book, A Reign of Night Birds. Let me say it properly. Hand to Hand Publishing, 2017 release.
Hi, this is Dawn Brunke, author of Dreaming with Polar Bears, Spirit Journeys with Animal Guides. To learn more about me and my books, you can visit www.animalvoices.net. And you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronymus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Deena Metzger is our guest. You can learn more about her extraordinary work and beautiful writing at www.deena, D-E-N-A, Metzger, M-E-T-Z, GER.net. Her most recent publication, a novel entitled A Reign of Night Birds, Hand to Hand Publishing, 2017 release. And if you can't remember or you're not in a place to write down our guest links, remember they're all on the front of 21stcenturyradio.com. I wanted to come back to this notion of healing and disease and our whole planet's illness and the way in which we are now challenged to heal ourselves and our earth. You have a metaphor about cancer and the general, and I think it's very telling.
Do you want to say more?
Well, I like the way in which you have enunciated, any of us who have ever had to deal with the medical system, and certainly in cancer treatment, it's the way they treat the village. Let's burn the village. To say, it's the same thing in cancer. Let's burn the person and maybe they'll stay alive. It's like the death economy, as I called it for years, versus a life economy. Rather than supporting the immune system, let's go attack the cell. Let's go attack the person.
Well, that's exactly it. You may know that I have convened something over the last 14 years called Revisioning Medicine. And I gather medical people and medicine people. And the question that we address, because we very quickly become a kind of village or community, and the question that we address that's most important is, can we create a medical system, a medicine that does no harm?
Amen.
And medicine and the medical establishment, these are cultures, and they actually determine how we think about everything else. They come out of our culture, and they also create culture. So when you have a medical system that is subsumed with killing, then you have craziness. I mean, so we are... In medicine, we've got the war on cancer and the war on this and the war on that and the war on that.
Right.
Well, that's actually an incredible contradiction. And as I started thinking about cancer, first I saw it as an imperialist cell, that cancer, and that somehow cancer was drawing our attention to how we were living in the world, that what was happening in our body, we were doing outside in the world. So it's a cell that goes into a territory and takes it over and uses up all the resources, and ultimately everyone dies of toxins, of pollution. And that cell was once a functioning cell. That cell was once a kidney cell or a breast cell or a skin cell or whatever, and now it's not functioning anymore. Well, one of the things we're learning is that cell is the victim of environmental degradation, of pollution, of all the chemicals that we're putting out in the world. In fact, that cell is the result of the chemotherapy that we use to try to end the disease. It would be best if we looked at the culture and try to restore what's really healing. So when I work with someone who has an illness, I say, what is the story that this illness is telling? And what is the healing path that it calls us to? And it often calls us in the process of our own healing to a commitment to bringing healing to the world or the community, those around us, that we enter into a mind of healing. And that can change our bodies as well as our souls.
Yeah, from my own, I've had a number of autoimmune issues. They call it the shaman's disease. It's from flying around out there too much, I think. But in any event, I had Crohn's disease as a child and had surgery, and it was after that to get well. The medical system had nothing to offer. went around with my husband all over the East Coast back in the 70s, meeting, medicine healers and African shamans, et cetera, and then decided I got well after starting acupuncture, homeopathy, chiropractic, and then founded a center called the Ruscombe Mansion Community Health Center, which is now the oldest freestanding holistic healing center in America.
Oh, my.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. And we see that with nonprofits. From great tragedy and loss, people create these most beautiful, caring vessels.
Right. And, what you went to, it's like, what are the principles behind acupuncture? What is the principles behind all these medical systems that began to help you? You entered into a different world.
Exactly.
And it was a world of balance and harmony and subtlety, caring, complexity, all kinds of values. You began to live in that world. And so.
Yeah, and now, fortunately, it's expanded all across the world, and you can go into almost any major city now and find a good acupuncturist. Homeopathy is not as easy to find. Herbalism is re-arising. You write this, I like the way you say this, can love heal war, you ask. And then you say, we will have to find out, for there is no alternative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. When you work, as I'm sure you have, when you work, for example, with veterans who have been in war, particularly the kinds of wars that we now have, they have to be taken care of. They have been so bombarded by not only weapons, but by mind.
Yeah.
And they need to be brought back into a world in which they can believe again that people can care for each other. So it feels, everywhere I turn, I look at how do we restore the world and the values that sustain life. And I don't see any issue that doesn't respond to those questions.
And thankfully, the way you've articulated it very particularly, and I encourage our audience to find this online, the 19 Ways to the Fifth World. It begins with Spirit Exists.
Yes.
And there's community and counsel and story and the pathless path and bearing witness and disengagement. There's so many things, and it's such a beautiful contribution. I mean, you've made this checklist of, all right, these are all good. So before the evening's out, I want to talk to you about your work with elephants, because we share this in common, and I'd like to hear about it.
Well, I had a dream. Too long to go into it now. And the dream took me to Africa, and I had a crazy idea that I wanted to sit in council with the elephants. And people said to me, what do you mean? I said, I have no idea. But the shorthand is that I was with 5 other people in Botswana, in Chobe, and it was the last afternoon that we were there, and I had been preparing and praying all day, and this bull elephant from about a half mile away that seemed not to be aware of us at all suddenly started walking toward us. And I was in the back of an open truck, and I was terrified. I was not terrified of the elephant. I was terrified in that way of awe of what I suspected was happening. And the elephant stopped in front of the truck. I put my hands out so that he would know that I had no weapons. And he came very close. He could have taken his trunk and put it around my neck. And he twisted his trunk into an impossible knot. And then he just looked into my eyes for 10 minutes. And then he went to the other side of the truck and again to another side. And we were 30 minutes all eye to eye. And I said to him in my mind, I said, I know who you are. You are from a Holocausted people, and I am from a Holocausted people. And so I promise you, your people are my people. And suddenly it was a half an hour, and he had to, he just left. And we were all undone. We were weeping. I said, did this really happen? Well, it really happened. Now we had to leave the park because they were going to close it. And as we started going down the road, we watched herds of elephants just coming down the incline down to the road by the river, which was the only way out. And the man who was driving said, we can't go this way. We're going to come between mothers and their calves. And I said, they know we're here. There's no other way out, and we just have to chance it. So we went along the road. The elephants lined up, and they bowed their heads, and they flapped their ears. And this was the last hour of the last day that we were there. I've gone back about 12 times, and each time, not only in this place, but in other countries, in other places, and I have had such extraordinary, inexplicable, unbelievable experiences.
How beautiful. With that, I do need to say good evening to you, my dear. Deena Metzger, you are a marvel. www.DENA-Metzger.net. The universe says, she writes, lost a man's birth, and the two are lovers.
Stay connected with stimulating talk and breaking news on Talk Radio 680 WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com.